Dani Olmo is now increasingly, it looks like, I think he's traveling to Barcelona as we recorded. Someone put up the video. I think the Sky team put up the video of him packing up his luggage, and you get you can see it live how he's headed to the airport to sign a long-term contract with Barcelona. I saw somewhere 6 years. I thought UEFA was going to put a limit on these, but I guess the financials have to work out one way or another. I was with Leipzig last week in New York. There's some more content coming. Now that I've kind of recovered from my long weekend, there's more content coming from that because it was an interesting time, and I got a lot of availability. And I was told then that once Barcelona meets their demands, and they have to meet their demands, and it has to be in a way that it's not what we chatted about last week. It was 40 million in 4 installments plus 20 million in bonuses. When I talked to them about that and I mentioned that to them, I someone who knows and is involved in these negotiations just started laughing and said that is absolutely unacceptable for us. It has to be a deal where we can see the money up front right away. It can be in installments, but they said that it has to be structured in a way that the money is there quickly and that it doesn't involve a huge chunk in bonuses. I think that is now the case. You will see all sorts of money of euro amounts floating around there. I can guarantee you pretty much it will be 60 million euros. That will be the amount that it comes to. And that is unlikely to involve big bonus payments, Stefan, is from what I've been told. That was the prerequisite for this deal to work. They were always going to say this or nothing else, otherwise we keep the player because the player just signed a new contract. The usual spiel about this kind of stuff. And I think as much as we're going to miss Dani Olmo and as much as he had been fantastic in the Bundesliga, I get this sort of sense that they weren't that sad at Leipzig about it. I think they see it as a way that they got a lot of money for a player who, when he was fit, delivered for them. But I mentioned to them, like, well, isn't one of the big issues is fitness? And I just got nods all around. And, that I think that is something that you really mentioned last week, that you were surprised that if anyone would pay this kind of money because of his fitness concerns. Barcelona decided to do it. I have still no idea where they found this money. Maybe the flag posts or the cantina or the parking lot. Maybe that was sold to generate that sort of money. But they got it somehow over the line, and I think for Leipzig this means a lot of money that they can now use for other places in the squad, create a little bit more stability in terms of the players that they bring in, and we're going to talk about one player in particular in a moment. But Stefan, at a second glance, this is probably a pretty good deal for Leipzig.
It's a great deal for Leipzig. If I was a Leipzig fan, being about this, I'd be getting in my car and offering to drive him to the airport myself for that kind of money. And it's interesting. I actually wrote a piece about Dani Olmo prior to the just ahead of the European Championships final for Transfermarkt, looking at where his future lied, and because we're privy to such details and stats to Transfermarkt, I actually went back to look and see how many games he'd actually missed for Leipzig over the course of the last 3 seasons. And I know it's something we talk about, but it really is worth kind of pointing out because it's hard to believe. But, for example, over the last 3 seasons, he's missed 68 games for Leipzig through injury. And if you actually bottle that down just to the Bundesliga, it means he's only played in 38% of the available game time that he's been at the club. So less than half the games that, had he been fully fit, he would have played in, which in the modern era is just really quite staggering, to be perfectly honest with you, especially for a younger player. And that's why we talked about it a few last week. I drew the comparison to Marco Reus in the sense that, well, that should really it really kind of put most big clubs off signing him. That's just a red line, in my opinion, unless there's some, there's some extremely detailed medical report that underlines the point that his injuries have all been unrelated, they're completely separate from one another, they're not recurring, and there's every chance that he can spend the rest of his career injury-free. I certainly hope he can, because he is an absolute marvel on the pitch, as we saw at the European Championships, but that itself is just a really startling stat. And for Leipzig to get 60 million euros for him, I actually think is quite an incredible sum of money for what is a player who has been fit for less than half the amount of game time that he's been playing. But I suspect, as is always the case at Barcelona, that politics is at play. Nico Williams was the other kind of big name that was expected to join the club this summer, and on Sunday, he basically came out and confirmed that he wasn't moving to Barcelona. And I suspect what's happened here is that the club have basically scrambled and said, well, we need to sign someone to keep the fans happy, because they haven't spent really any money this summer at all. Admittedly, they have got a couple of big names off there.
Because they don't have any money, Stefan.
No, of course, yeah. But, I mean, admittedly, they have managed to get some big names off their wage bill. Sergio Dest, who I'm sure a lot of listeners will know. Marcos Alonso, left back. Sergio Roberto is a kind of older centre midfielder. And the loan deals for João Felix and João Cancelo have both kind of expired. So maybe there's a bit of wiggle room with that wage bill where they can kind of move that in towards transfer fees. But I just can't stop thinking of a situation where Hansi Flick walks into work tomorrow and, the club president says, hey, Hansi, we finally managed to sign someone. He's like, brilliant, who have you signed? This guy, Dani Olmo from Leipzig. Hansi Flick obviously saying, hold on a minute. I was a head coach at Bayern Munich for, 3 seasons, and I only got to see Dani Olmo in the flesh once, I think, because he was injured all that often. And you're telling me you've blown the entire budget on that guy. Because I cannot imagine that this deal has been greenlit under the eyes of Hansi Flick, and he's okayed that, because he should know firsthand the injury troubles that Dani Olmo has gone through. So I suspect it's just a simple case that this is politics. Barcelona board feel like they have to sign someone. He's Spanish. He's an ex academy player at Barcelona. It's a whole coming home to be the prodigal son, or whatever you want to call it. It kind of sells all those metrics, but I suspect in a year's time, Leipzig might be feeling pretty smug that they got 60 million euros out of this one. And can we just talk about that for a second? Just how good Leipzig seem to be at consistently getting top dollar for these players.
It's incredible. Like, look at Guardiola last year, right? What was it? Almost 100 million at the end. I think it was 95 all in, right? You're 100% right, and they are kind of smug about it. I'm not gonna lie. When you mention the amount of money, but this is they will point out that this is the only way for them to grow and stick with financial fair play regulations. There's a lot of negative stuff said and written about Leipzig, but at the end of the day, unlike some of these other big entities that are owned by other clubs that are owned by big entities, they're trying to stick to FFP rules very strictly. And unfortunately for them, that means that they have to sell assets. But that's okay if you're really good at it. I mean, they're very good at turning someone like Dani Olmo into a big transfer, or Josko Guardiola. And I mean, both those players, I think, they got from Dinamo Zagreb, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that has been their way, and that is the way they've been growing. I think they finally hit in the UEFA Club Efficient ranking the top 10 this year, which is something that they're very proud of, right? Because they now belong what they see as one of the top 10 clubs. Of course, they understand they want to win more silverware. That is something that they're really striving towards. It can't be just the German Cups. I've been told that one of the big things is, of course, that maybe next time when Bayern have a poor season, it won't be Leverkusen, it will be them at the top. That is something that they're very much aware of. But yeah, they're very good at refinancing their squad and adding pieces at the same time. And you know what? I think they reached the Champions League every season but one since they've been in the Bundesliga. That is the sort of consistency you need, Stefan, to grow financially, reach that top 10 in the UEFA coefficient ranking, right? Which then also turns into the fact that as your revenue grows, you are allowed to spend more on players because the money, let's be honest, we all know who's behind the club. They have money. Money isn't an issue. It's just the amount of money you are allowed to spend is the issue, right? It's two different things. But they have been very smart about kind of increasing their revenue stream in many different ways. And I don't think they're too far off in that regard in terms of maybe next time Bayern struggle in a season. I think it would be hard this year because I think both you and I suspect that Leverkusen might defend their title, right? But yeah, I think there's a lot of things that Leipzig do really well, and one of them is selling players while keeping the level of the squad very high.